the summer I turned 16. My father took me fishing on the river that ran behind our property. It was our tradition, something we had done every year since I could walk. He would wake me before dawn, make sandwiches, pack the old tackle box, and we would spend the day on the water, not talking much, just being together. I loved those days more than anything. He was my hero, my protector, the man who made me feel safe in a world that often felt dangerous. That summer, he told me stories about his own father, about the land, about the river. He told me that one day, all of this would be mine. He didn't know he only had 3 years left to live. My name is Nora Vance, and I grew up on that land, 80 acres of forest and fields along the Blackwood River. My great-grandfather had bought it for next to nothing 100 years ago, when this part of the country was still wild. Generation after generation, our family had lived there, worked the land, loved the land. It wasn't just property. It was our history, our identity, our soul. When my father died of a sudden heart attack at 53, I thought the hardest part was losing him. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching what came next. My father had a partner, a man named Julian Croft, who had been in business with him for 20 years. They owned a construction company together, built houses and commercial buildings across 3 counties. Julian was at every family gathering, every holiday, every important moment of my life. He was my godfather, my uncle in all but blood. When my father died, Julian was the one who held me while I cried. He was the one who promised to take care of everything to protect the business, to protect me. I believed him. I was 19 years old, devastated, and desperate to trust someone. The problems started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A document here, a signature there. Julian would come to me with papers, explaining that they were routine, necessary for the transition of ownership. I signed without reading. I was too young, too grieving, too trusting to question the man my father had trusted for 2 decades. Within a year, I had signed away everything. The business, the land, the house I grew up in, all of it was now under Julian's control. I didn't realize it until it was too late. The day he told me, I was 20 years old, sitting in his office, expecting to discuss plans for the future. He smiled that familiar smile, the one I had known my entire life, and handed me a folder. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Nora," he said, "but business is business. Your father made some unwise decisions in his final years. I've been protecting you from the consequences, but I can't anymore. The company is in debt. The land has to be sold. You'll have to find somewhere else to live." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process his words. "What do you mean? This land has been in our family for 100 years. My father would never, he cut me off. Your father is dead, Nora, and the documents you signed give me full authority to manage his affairs. I'm sorry, truly, but there's nothing you can do." I spent the next 2 years fighting. I hired lawyers, dug through records, tried to find some way to prove that Julian had manipulated me, taken advantage of my grief. But the documents were legal, the signatures were mine, and Julian had covered his tracks too well. I lost everything. The land was sold to a developer, a man named Marcus Webb, who planned to build luxury homes along the river. The company was dissolved, its assets liquidated. I was left with nothing but a small settlement, barely enough to rent a tiny apartment in a town I didn't know. I was 22 years old, alone, broke and broken. I thought about giving up. I thought about disappearing, fading into the background, letting Julian win. But something stopped me, something my father had said on that last fishing trip, 3 years before he died. "The river knows all our secrets. Nora, it's been here longer than any of us. One day, when I'm gone, it will still be here, and it will remember." I didn't understand then. I do now. The river remembered. And so would I. I spent the next 5 years rebuilding myself. I moved to a different state, took a new name, started a new life. I worked during the day and studied at night, learning everything I could about law, about finance, about the kind of people who destroy others for profit. I became someone new, someone Julian would never recognize. I was no longer Nora Vance, the grieving daughter, the naive girl who signed away her inheritance. I was Elena Ross, a sharp, ambitious woman with a plan. I tracked Julian's movements, his business, his life. He had prospered, of course. He always did. He had used the money from my land to expand his operation, to build a small empire. He was respected, wealthy, untouchable. Marcus Webb, the developer who bought my land, had built his luxury homes and made a fortune. They were partners now, working together on bigger projects, celebrating their success while I faded into obscurity. They had no idea I was watching. They had no idea I was coming. The first move was subtle. I used my new identity to get a job at a company that did business with Julian's firm. I worked my way up, quietly, patiently, learning everything about his operation. I discovered that he was still doing what he had always done, manipulating documents, forging signatures, stealing from people who trusted him. He had a dozen victims, families like mine, destroyed by his greed. I found them, reached out to them, built a network of people who wanted justice. We were ghosts, invisible, waiting. The second move was bolder. I used my knowledge of his business to create a trap, a fake investment opportunity that was too good to resist. Julian took the bait, of course. He always did. He poured money into the project, borrowed against his assets, committed everything to what he thought would be his biggest success. He had no idea that the entire thing was a fiction, a carefully constructed illusion designed to bring him down. The night before the deal was supposed to close, I walked into his office. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was Elena Ross, a business associate, nothing more. I sat across from him and smiled. "Do you remember Nora Vance?" I asked. His face went pale. "I'm her," I said, "and I've come to collect what you owe me." The silence in Julian's office was absolute. He stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. "Nora," he whispered. "It can't be." I smiled. The same smile I had practiced in the mirror for years, the one that held no warmth, no forgiveness, no mercy. "It's been a long time, Julian. You look well, prosperous. I've been watching you for years, waiting for this moment. And now it's here." He started to speak, to deny, to explain, but I cut him off. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on his desk. Inside were copies of every document he had ever forged, every signature he had ever faked, every victim he had ever destroyed. There were bank records, email trails, witness statements. There was proof of the fraud that had stolen my land, my inheritance, my future. And there was proof of so much more. Julian had been running this game for decades, long before my father. He had destroyed dozens of families, ruined countless lives, built his empire on a foundation of lies and stolen dreams. "This is going to the authorities tomorrow morning," I said, "unless you agree to my terms." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "What terms?" I told him. He would transfer ownership of my family's land back to me. He would liquidate his company and distribute the proceeds to every person he had ever defrauded. He would sign a full confession, detailing every crime, every lie, every victim. And then he would disappear. He would leave the country, change his name, and never return. If he did any of those things, I would not release the evidence. He would be free, but he would be watched. I would always be watching. He stared at the folder, his hands shaking, his mind racing through every possible escape. There was none. I had spent 5 years building this case, leaving no stone unturned, no detail overlooked. He was trapped, and he knew it. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why are you giving me a choice? I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his, because I want you to live with what you've done. I want you to spend the rest of your life knowing that you lost everything, that you're nothing, that the girl you destroyed became the woman who destroyed you. Prison would be too easy. This is worse. He signed. There was no fight left in him. The transfer of my land was completed within days. The liquidation of his company took months, but I watched every step, made sure every victim received what they were owed. The confession was recorded, notarized, and locked in a safe deposit box. Insurance against any future betrayal. And then Julian Croft disappeared. He left the country, as promised, and I never saw him again. I heard through my network that he was living in a small town in Central America, working a menial job, keeping his head down. He knows I'm still watching. He knows that one wrong move, one more victim, and the evidence will find its way to the authorities. He lives in a cage of his own making, and I hold the key. Marcus Webb, the developer who bought my land, was a different story. He wasn't a fraud like Julian, just a greedy man who had profited from someone else's crime. He had built his luxury homes along the river, made his fortune, and never once thought about the family he had displaced. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted something else. I wanted my land back. I approached him as Elena Ross, a wealthy investor interested in purchasing riverfront property. He was eager, desperate to sell in a slowing market. We negotiated for months, and in the end, I bought back every acre of my family's land for a fraction of what it was worth. He thought he had made a good deal. He had no idea he was selling to the girl whose legacy he had helped steal. The day I signed the papers, I drove to the property for the first time in 7 years. The luxury homes were there, beautiful and empty, waiting for buyers who might never come. But the land was still the same. The river still flowed, just as my father had said it would. I walked down to the water, sat on the bank, and listened. I listened to the sound of the current, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, and I heard my father's voice, faint but clear, carried on the breeze. I'm proud of you, Nora. I always knew you would find your way home. I stayed there until dark, thinking about everything, about my father, about Julian, about the years I had spent hunting for justice. I thought about the victims I had helped, the families who had received their restitution, the lives I had touched. I thought about the woman I had become, someone my father would recognize and, I hoped, be proud of. And I thought about the future, uncertain but now filled with possibility. I didn't keep the luxury homes. I donated them to a nonprofit that provides housing for families in need. I kept the land, 80 acres of forest and fields along the Blackwood River. I built a small cabin on the spot where my father and I used to fish, a simple place where I could come and remember. And I started a foundation in his name, helping other families who had been victimized by fraud, providing legal support and financial assistance to those who needed it most. Julian is still in Central America, living his small life, haunted by what he did. Marcus Webb moved to Florida, retired, wealthy, but empty. I don't think about them much anymore. They're not worth the mental energy. What matters is the land, the river, the legacy. What matters is that my father's words were true. The river remembers. And so do I. I go back to the cabin as often as I can. I sit on the bank, watch the water flow, and talk to my father. I tell him about the foundation, about the families we help, about the justice we've brought. I tell him about the woman I've become, the one he always believed I could be, and I listen for his voice, carried on the current, telling me he's proud. The river's secret is this. It holds everything, every memory, every loss, every victory. It flows on, unchanged, eternal. And so does the love between a father and daughter. That is the fortune I found, the one no one could ever steal. That is the legacy I will carry for the rest of my life.